All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wireless Buffet, a podcast and video roundtable discussion that talks about all things wireless and has entertaining and insightful guests. Today, we have some great people. My name is Nick Dinsmoor. I'm the guest host today on the Wireless Buffet. I'd like to first introduce or be introduced by the president of SmartWAVE, Al Brown. You just tell us a little bit about you and who you are and what you do.
Hey guys, Al Brown, President and CEO of SmartWAVE Technologies. We are a wireless-centric design build management firm and a proud Ruckus partner trying to make a difference in everything we do wireless.
Awesome. And our other guest today, Bart, take it away.
Thanks very much, Nick. So my name is Bart Giordano, and I'm responsible for the Ruckus Global Sales Organization at CommScope. Ruckus is a broadline campus networking business. I've personally been in the networking and wireless industry for about 20 years now, and very happy to call SmartWAVE one of our top partners.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, obviously, lots of news around the wireless world, lots of news around technology. You can't throw a stick without hitting something about money coming from the government, and most of it around infrastructure. So today we're going to be focusing in on why investing in infrastructure makes a difference to both businesses like ours as well as communities. Because as Al said, a lot of what we try to do collectively, the greater good, is do right by communities across the country and for CommScope across the world. So you've heard the old expression, measure twice, cut once. I know I have, and I've not done it all the time and made a lot of mistakes. So when you think about planning for communities, when you think about planning for a wireless network for a community, why is that important?
Well, Nick, I'll take a first shot at this. When we meet with these cities, there's a lot of dreams about what the possibilities are, and in the planning process that we go through, we're at SmartWAVE, we have a specific methodology that we follow. We're pretty stubborn about it, but that stubbornness leads to success. So in that planning process with our methodology, we're able to quickly identify the challenges that might be associated with meeting the goals of the project. Specific to designing wireless networks, such as a community wireless broadband network with Ruckus products, or say if it's with a private LTE solution, all of these technologies are asset dependent, and that means an asset in this case is a street light, or a traffic signal, or a water tank, could be a tower, could be a building, right? And all those assets are key ingredients to success. So as we meet with cities in this planning, one of the first things we do is we identify those assets. Because if you don't have those assets, or what assets you do have and what ones you don't have access to, that may very well dictate the technology choice that is best for your community wireless broadband deployment. And based on that technology, because all technologies are different, Wi-Fi has a lot more capacity than, say, private LTE, right? But private LTE has more range than Wi-Fi. So that will help you set the expectations to your constituents with respect to the type of coverage you can provide in the area, and with respect to the type of capacity that you can provide. And we all know that in these environments, Nick, within a city, it can be pretty political. So you don't want to miss that mark by too much.
Setting the wrong expectations.
You think politics is playing involved with money here, right? That's crazy. That's crazy talk.
It is. It's nuts, man. It's nuts, but it is what it is, Nick. So we're just along for the ride to do the best we can.
I think stepping back for a sec from the way it gets done, right? Because there are some practical considerations when you're deploying technology in a municipal environment, particularly outdoors, as Al described, is why a community wants to engage in this. Why should the public funds be used to invest in this type of infrastructure to maintain connectivity? Given I think most of us take for granted that we have sort of ubiquitous connectivity wherever we go. I think as you reflect on the events of the last year, right, when we all went into shelter in place, and suddenly we were thrust into the realm of distance learning for our children and remote work, And again, we're all sitting here on a comfortable on a Zoom call having this podcast for the Wireless Buffet. But there's a lot of communities around our country and around the world that don't have the same access to affordable broadband that we all take for granted. And that was really exposed throughout the pandemic as you had children and people who were trying to work that did not have the capability to go remote because they lacked reliable broadband. And this is where I think the US federal government and many of communities have really stepped up to address this need. I mean, we all, saw the videos of children huddled in parking lots at McDonald's trying to get on the local Wi-Fi, right? Because they don't have the broadband at home that many of us just, consider ubiquitous around us today. And Wi-Fi in that, respect is sort of unifying, right? Because it is ubiquitous. Most of the devices we have, all the devices we have connect over Wi-Fi. And if a community is able to provide a high quality, high capacity, reliable system that they can deploy in an outdoor environment, then it sort of levels the playing field in those communities.
Yeah, I think one thing that's clear is that it has become a movement, right? Like it's no longer hey, like we should kind of think about broadband getting into communities. Now it's it's beyond a movement, right? It's got the money and the backing behind it. But I guess one question maybe on that note, so the term smart city comes up a lot. And I guess the question is, can you, if you're a small community, maybe a rural community or even in a metro, what size of a city is a smart city? Or maybe even take it up 1,000 feet, what is a smart city?
Well, in a very simplistic form, well, first and foremost, smart city, you asked that question, it can be defined in like a variety of ways. But like I said, in the simplest form, it's a city that strives to stretch a taxpayer dollar in providing public safety and services to the community. And, a lot of cities focus on the application efficiencies with like smart street lighting and traffic control, water quality or air quality and, video surveillance and those kind of things. But what's great with a smart city is if you can build an infrastructure that can support the variety of application needs, but also serve the community in other ways, that's going to take the taxpayer dollar even further. So today, especially with the in light of the pandemic, more and more cities, what we're seeing are including digital equity programs as part of their smart city play. Because, what that's going to do is, as Bart mentioned, right, you can't do anything without connectivity. We're somewhat privileged here in our offices, right, with a good broadband connection. We can have a Zoom call, but there's, unfortunately, there are, millions of users or potential users throughout the United States that don't have any means of connectivity. And that means that, when they're shelter in place, they can't continue online learning. So they're going to fall a year behind, right? And we started a program years and years ago about no student left behind. So we got to keep that going. Also, it's impossible to apply for a job without online tools. I mean, I don't know how you even answer a job response or anything if you don't have any connectivity. But taking that a step further with your community, right? I mean, we're in a nation where you have an opportunity to build your own business, to expand. So I absolutely see no way you can even start a business in some of these communities if you don't have connectivity. And but if you can start a business, then you can hire employees. If you hire employees, that's income. That's consumption that's going to take place in the marketplace. All of these abilities to purchase leads to tax revenue. Tax revenue leads to more police, more fire. That's a smart city. So, we encourage all cities to include digital equity as part of their plan.
So who should we be? Like, if you guys had the opportunity to talk to anybody in a city, who is it? The community leader? Is it the IT guy? Is it the network infrastructure guy? Like, who should be educated or more educated about the technology that is going on and available to them?
Well, ultimately, it starts with, who has the political will and capital to make things happen in that particular
Well,
community, right? I mean,
well
it's
said, Bart.
it's
The
as,
leader.
yeah,
Yes.
it's the leader right now. Smart cities bring together constituencies across all those functional areas that you mentioned to think about, how are we going to employ technology in our city to improve the quality of lives for our citizens, right? That's fundamentally, I think, what a smart city is all about. And then, as I'll talk through, the foundation or the platform for the smart city is really the connectivity, right? So the first thing a lot of cities will do is just put in a fiber ring around the city, right? Which becomes the underlay then for building on the wireless networks we touched on earlier that start to connect not just people and constituents in your community, but now things and different types of assets, which allow you, to layer on technologies and applications that will make that city operate more efficiently and effectively, whether it is, services for first responders, or it is, smart traffic control, environmental sensing. All of these things are really underpinned by world-class connectivity. And so that's kind of where it starts, right? But you do need to influence the right folks. And those are, in our communities, those are the political leaders that have a vision and ambition and are willing to spend political capital to go out and convince people to engage on, what are oftentimes really ambitious, multi-year and multi-decade long strategic plans to evolve to this type of investment in the community.
So that's a great point. I mean, when you think about infrastructure, again, paying dividends, are we too short-sighted? Are we looking at it as, hey, we're investing now, we expect a result in 3 months, 6 months, a year? Should we be reframing it to that investment in infrastructure is it a multi-decade investment?
I believe it's fundamentally got to be built around a long-term vision, right? Because of the capital required to implement these things, and B, there's physical planning and construction required, right, to go out. And so if you have a community of a sufficient size, you need to do a lot of thoughtful planning. One of the things we haven't touched on is the aesthetics of deploying all this technology, right? Al mentioned finding the right assets to hang infrastructure from physically, but we find now that concealment and the aesthetics of the deployment are as equally important, if not more important, to the community as the underlying technology and infrastructure and capability is, right? So it does require a careful amount of thoughtful planning. Permitting process varies considerably across many communities, right? That sometimes is the longest leg of a project. And so you got to take a long-term view and be very patient and kind of manage your constituents and other leaders that have a stake in these projects along the way.
Yeah, I think people sometimes forget about the when we say the word infrastructure, that it actually requires sometimes you're trudging up yards, you're digging up roads, you're making a mess to create something that is ubiquitous, right? That it's
in doing these projects, Nick, and working with cities throughout the U.S., to be successful, it takes a village. And when you build a broadband infrastructure, you may think the IT department is the lead in a lot of these projects, but oftentimes it's public works, right? Or another city department. It could be the Department of Transportation if they have access to fiber along the right of way. So, the ability to go in and work with these cities and what's kind of fun about these projects personally is that a lot of these departments don't know each other before we start the project. And, when the project's done, the vision's a common goal of connectivity. It's pretty cool to be involved in, especially if you're someone who's used to just cleaning out traffic control cabinets, right? Now you're actually seeing the fruits of your labor because you're impacting people in your own community, right? With connectivity. The ability to break down those political barriers, even within a city, in these types of projects. It's a community effort that provides for a community outcome.
And I think when you tie this to digital equity and digital inclusion, it's really becomes very easy to feel a sense of purpose in what we're pursuing, right? I think we've talked a little bit theoretical about how cities are going about this today, but this is happening throughout our communities in the U.S. Al and I have had the opportunity to work on a few projects together, and we've got a few more over the horizon. But Al, maybe you can talk a little bit through the experience in Hidalgo County in Texas and the problems they had and what the community used as an approach to problem solving, because I think it really will put a finer point on the impact that these type of investments have in communities that really have very difficult problems to solve for many of their constituents.
Right. Well, in Hidalgo, Bart, one of the when we look at building these infrastructures, again, I mentioned the assets, the importance of that. Oftentimes, assets aren't there. I mean, when we talk about Hidalgo County, we were moving into neighborhoods that didn't have utility poles in place. So part of that project, the wireless piece was a large piece of that, a large part of that whole project. But we were constructing towers. We were extending out fiber infrastructure. We were installing utility poles. We were installing luminaire arms on utility poles to bring lighting into these neighborhoods. So the benefit wasn't just broadband connectivity. In some cases, it was power. Yeah. And what was great about it is that through an entire network architecture built in layers, where we had a backhaul layer of microwave links to extend the connectivity where we didn't have fiber, to a capacity injection layer where we would bring it from the tower and extend it to the street level at the street lights where we had the Ruckus Wi-Fi access points. We could deploy those access points along the street in these colonials, is what they would call them. And we could serve a high number of users with only a few access points, right? So our return on connectivity was extremely high. And from a safety standpoint, we didn't have to coordinate or schedule access into their homes because we're blasting that signal from the outside in. So it makes the project deployment extremely efficient. And when you're sheltered in place, the patience to wait for 2 years for fiber to come to your home is not acceptable. We had to get that connectivity there. So that it turned out to be great success for that community. And I mean, there's over 3,300 or 3,400 Wi-Fi access points in that deployment, right? And as everything goes through the testing process, I mean, we'll probably have 100,000 unique client devices being served. That's a community impact.
A big impact. And you went from a situation, prior to this project where you literally had children being asked, right, to engage in discourse over this medium that we're on today, right, in order to learn.
Yep.
And the community quickly realized we have a number of constituents that don't have basic broadband connectivity that is reliable from a phone or otherwise, right? And to their credit, they saw the need and they responded swiftly, and they were able to take advantage of the CARES Act funding that has been directed at a lot of these projects. And on the other side of this, right, you had very happy educators and teachers and community leaders that made an impact, right, simply by deploying Wi-Fi out on the city streets, right? Something that on the face of it, you kind of think, well, that's simple, and there's Wi-Fi pretty much everywhere I go. But you went from communities that didn't really experience the internet to overnight, being able to distance learn and remote work when necessary.
Well, the realization, Bart, on these projects is when you can say, hey, I'm gonna go down to Hidalgo, I'm gonna work on this project, I'm gonna go visit this area, and then you have to put in your out of office notification, because no one can contact you, right? Because there's no connectivity,
right?
I mean, that's when it gets real. That's when it gets real.
I think oftentimes we associate these challenges with very rural communities. But you know, Al, with SmartWAVE, we've also had the opportunity to work in some big cities, right? That
Yeah.
struggle with the same issue, and you know, they have public infrastructure at the schools that you know is very reliable and you know under you know backed up by really strong fiber. But 2 blocks away, out in the community, right, you can't get a reliable cell signal, and operators don't invest in broadband connectivity because the economics of it don't make sense. And we've had an opportunity to go into communities in really dense urban areas and solve a lot of these same challenges.
Yeah, Oakland and East San Jose. I mean, you think about East San Jose, we're the capital of the Silicon Valley, and an entire community, like 7 to 8 square miles that we're going to be covering, no connectivity or lack of connectivity to meet the needs of everyday life. In Oakland, from downtown Oakland to the San Leandro city limits along International Boulevard, it's all Wi-Fi connectivity now. And you know the system's being used when you're sending 15 terabytes of data in a couple of weeks, because that's the Library of Congress. Okay. And you know, the behavior of the users, the type of devices that we're seeing on the network now, we're seeing a lot more Roku boxes. I mean, people are shifting their TVs to the outer walls that get the connectivity, right? I mean, they are taking advantage of the network, and that's exactly what it's there for. So
do you think it's important for in these cities or the leaders to understand more about the technology that obviously we talked a lot about wireless, but Bart even mentioned, you know, the fiber rings, like, is it important to really understand all elements, right? Because each technology does something different and has a different purpose.
Well, absolutely, right? You know, here's the thing about what's going on in the marketplace that you have to be careful about is, you know, one technology can get a lot of buzz, but for the layman, they don't know how that works or what the requirements of it are. So
5G.
Yeah.
You gotta have
5G. Exactly. Which 5G are you talking about, Bart? It's like, so, you know, we're the communities we've worked with that have had the greatest success in these deployments are those that understand that there's not one silver bullet, right? And they can create a program based on their budgets that they have to augment or supplement different technologies. Eastside Union, for example, right? We talked about that. That's in East San Jose. Built a large Ruckus Wi-Fi mesh network, right? Serving, you know, 10,000 unique client devices around one high school attendance area, right? Which was a tremendous success. But there were outliers where there may be 1 or 2 or a handful of students not within that coverage area that needed connectivity. And the, you know, lowest cost approach for that was a MiFi hotspot, right? It didn't make sense economically to extend out connectivity to capture 1 or 2 users, right? So knowing your technologies that you have available to you, and you know, taking the emotion out of it and building something that again is going to enhance your return on connectivity, that's the key play, and that's what we try to encourage our cities to think about. With fiber, we all know that it's really tough to put a fiber, you know, connection in your pocket and walk around and do this. But cool. But in building the networks, right? I mean, we need that. We need that, right? So that's a valuable asset in the planning process. As a technology that, you know, we're big fans of, right? I mean, the Ruckus and SmartWAVE team, we love fiber because we know if we can get access to fiber, then when it comes down to it, we're going to have high capacity Wi-Fi that's going to serve the user community. Yep. And then where there's not fiber, I mean, now, you know, the Facebook Telegraph technology is a multi-gig wireless technology, short range, but multi-gig. It's been a great asset, and we're incorporating that into our designs, even in downtown San Jose, where we're upgrading the downtown Wi-Fi infrastructure with Ruckus Wi-Fi and with the Telegraph technology for backhaul.
So let's shift a little bit and talk about security. So obviously, just like the amount of news around funding for infrastructure, there's probably the same amount of news about hacking, security, people taking over, using webcams, looking at whatever. What should these communities be thinking about when, I guess, or any issues around security they should be cognizant of when they're trying to design a network for the community?
I think you got to be really deliberate about two things: security, and I'll separate from that privacy, right? Because these are public networks that citizens are connecting to. You need to not only secure that network to avoid disclosure of personal information, but you have to be very careful about how you use the data that is generated on that network. And so, cities are leaning into this and developing, public policy around the treatment of data, as well as a cybersecurity infrastructure that they want to follow, because unfortunately there's been some pretty visible incidents, right, around breaches that have resulted in ransomware attacks and other things that have really hurt communities, right? And it's a setback not only financially or commercially, but also just in terms of how the technology is perceived and what resonates in the community and the risk that's perceived there. So you have to have a comprehensive strategy, not just understanding the technology, but the risks associated with it, and develop policies that are published so people know how the data that is generated on that network is going to be used by the government agencies that are managing it and their partners.
It's a fine balance of how much you want to lock it down versus usage, right? Yeah. We'll have some communities that will not only lock down the network from a security standpoint, but from applications, right? And so if you can't use Netflix, then what's up? Why, I want to use it for schooling, but I also want to use it for fun.
Who, I guess, who does have the obligation though, right? So, I mean, is it the person who's using the technology? Is the person who's building the infrastructure? Is it the community? Who has that, I guess, obligation to make those rules? And we talk a lot about digital equity. I mean, digital equity means equal access, right? And so, who should, I guess, or who within the community should be having that discussion?
Well, I think the leaders that are funding and operationalizing these projects need to have a security policy and strategy that is open to scrutiny and public review. But we all have a personal responsibility too, right? As users of this network to be aware of what those policies are and share information and access those assets accordingly, right? According to our own preference. But I think this is another area where, frankly, a lot of people, for the sake of convenience, give up the opportunity to understand what the terms of service are, right? We all do it. We all just click through the fine print because I want to get online and stream Netflix, as Al mentioned, right?
Yeah.
I don't mind getting retargeted by all the ads with the new shirt I should buy or the new next toy I should buy. It's okay, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
You can't mind that. That's your business, man.
So I mean, right now we're a little over halfway through 2021, which is hard to believe. What do you guys see in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months, that are bits of insight that these communities or anybody thinking about investing in infrastructure should be contemplating right now?
Well, I think, with the amount of funding that is coming down the pipeline, right? Cities need to start thinking about those areas of greatest need and identify the right partners, to be honest with you, that have been there and done that, right? Because as Bart mentioned earlier, it's not as easy as just putting a Wi-Fi radio up on a street light or a traffic signal, right? That's like the smallest part of the entire equation. It's the planning and design. It's the expectation setting. It's getting all the constituents on board, right? For what the network is and what the network isn't. Expectation setting. I tell a lot of customers, as good of a job as we do with planning and designing these networks, probably the greatest value we bring to our clients is expectation setting. And because we take a very methodical, process-based approach of how to deploy these networks.
I think you said the word stubborn was the word you used before.
Stubborn, bullish, stubborn. Yes. So, there's a way to do it and there's a way not to do it. I can point to successful deployments, and that's another thing that I'm never scared of telling a prospect that, look, I'll go through the process. I go, look, if you guys follow this process, your chances for success are very high, whether you do it with us, SmartWAVE, or not, whether you do it with this product or that product, okay? But if you can follow this process, I can tell you this, you will set the right expectations. You're going to know where your money's going, right? And if you set those expectations with the money to your community, that's success, and get connectivity. And then if you do it wrong, we'll come in and clean it up and do it right.
I think, with the trends in the marketplace right now, right? I think, we're at a point now where people are sort of acknowledging things like flexible or remote work and distance learning in some capacity are here to stay, right? Even if things, quote unquote, return to normal, there's an expectation now of connectivity to enable a more flexible lifestyle around education and around labor and work, particularly for knowledge workers. And that coupled with, massive amounts of stimulus coming into the market in the US here in particular to solve the types of challenges that we've talked through over the last 30 minutes or so, it's a great opportunity for communities to think about how they'll go about executing this strategy. Not just to help the constituents they have today, but many cities are very eager to attract new, younger folks to become part of their community and become part of the local economy. And certainly being able to market yourself as a high-tech city or a connected city is one way to do that. So I think there's a lot of those discussions happening now. I think sometimes part of the hesitation is around things we touched on, security and privacy on networks that are operated in the public domain. Part of it is, sometimes what is the perceived complexity around going out and filling out a grant and getting access to these funds. So Ruckus, we started the Fetch program, which is guidance for communities and folks in those communities that want to engage on these products about how they can go about pursuing public funding available for these. And then we connect you to fantastic partners like SmartWAVE when you need to get into the planning and execution phase to deliver a robust architecture and network that the community can rely on.
Awesome. Well said. All right, gentlemen, it is hard to believe we've almost been talking for almost 40 minutes and it is a wireless buffet, but I think we may have eaten as much as we can eat in one day. I want to really thank both of you for your insights. We've obviously talked about some really great nuggets of information around infrastructure, things to think about, as Bart said and Al said, around security and community. And I think, one of the things that really sticks out in this is that I think we do a lot of times always think it's the IT guy. Like we always associate all these conversations in technology about IT guy, the CIO. But I think you guys have pointed out very clearly they're a piece of the pie. And there's a lot of other elements that these communities and people trying to drive this should be considering. So great insight. So thanks everybody for listening to the Wireless Buffet. You can see us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all those fun places. And any final parting thought from either of you, or you can just wave and say goodbye.
Peace.
Thanks, everybody.